So we create a legacy, and this legacy can be both with the company and in the kingdom, I like to say, the kingdom of Jesus. Because if you pick your top three, like Jesus had Peter, James, and John, and you intentionally begin to disciple them, not only for the business operation, but for also a faith component, they're going to not only be beholden to you, but also beholden to the company that created a lifestyle and an understanding of life that's so important to them. They're going to share that legacy with you. So on a qualitative perspective, that's really the goal, is to raise up healthy leaders that can not only lead well, but also multiply themselves. Because without multiplication, you're not going to grow.
If you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Please subscribe to Defenders Live on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and join our group on Facebook as well. And if you don't want to miss another episode, you can sign up for email notifications at defenders-live.com. Jerry Howard is an executive mentor, author, and speaker, and owns multiple businesses. A veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, he is the founder and guiding force behind Intrepid Impact Team, a faith-driven leadership and business consulting agency. But he says his corporate resume isn't what makes him so special. It's his failure resume that makes him so unique. Overcoming alcoholism, drugs, and all kinds of debauchery, he says, began with a prayer to the Lord, and within 5 years of that prayer, he was made the CEO of a hospital. And he says that God has continually increased his provision through all manners of personal and professional challenges. Jail, near divorce, and unexpected death of his friend, his best friend, and COVID closing one of his businesses were just a few times that Jerry says he was carried by God's grace. He specializes in building world-class KPI-driven results to small and middle market business owners, while simultaneously teaching them to be leaders worth following. He enjoys creating content that intersects faith, leadership, and business, which to him are as inseparable, he says, as the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. He loves being a part of God's special forces by bringing faith to the marketplace, the nation's largest mission field. Jerry has been married for over 22 years, has 4 children, 2 in college and 2 in middle school, and he enjoys being with the family and doing active sports such as snowboarding and mountain biking. He recharges by writing about God's word, riding his Harley with earbuds, and contemporary classical music, and of course, loves learning to be a better disciple of Jesus. Let's welcome Jerry onto the show. Hey, Jerry.
Laura, thank you so much for having me. This is an absolute blessing to be here.
I'm looking forward to it. I have a good feeling. I got a real good feeling about this. So I want to start with something here that you sent me, and it's going to take a minute for me to read it, and it won't be all in full context, so you might have to fill in a few blanks here. But you sent me this link to a magazine. Will you refresh my memory which one it was again?
That's Victorious Living. Yeah.
Yes, Victorious Living magazine. You wrote this article, and it is so well written, first of all, I want to say. But secondly, there's an excerpt from here I'd like to read. And then could you help us fill in the blanks here? Because this is remarkable. Not only the way you wrote, but wow, what you have been through to get to where you are now is remarkable. So if you'll let me here, it says, for decades, I lived alongside the tracks where poor decisions are made. I knew better, but like Jacob in the Bible, I wrestled with the creator of heaven and earth. Genesis 32:24. I wanted what I wanted, and I did what I had to get it. Like Jacob, before he surrendered to God, I too was a deceiver. I dodged trains, bullies, and cops with one goal: to get away with, well, everything. And all the while, I upheld a glimmering image of success. Life on the edge was exhausting and costly. And then came the train I couldn't dodge. The financial, legal, and marital problems I'd been ignoring all climbed aboard an express locomotive headed straight for me. I knew I was done. That's when I remembered God. Desperate, I closed my eyes and prayed, God, if you're real, snap your fingers and make all my problems go away. That's quite the prayer. Somewhere in the depths of my toxic, deluded heart, I actually believed that when I opened my eyes, God would have rescued me, but he didn't. He let the train wreck happen. The God who could have changed everything changed nothing. I ended up in jail, had to attend rehab, and paid some hefty fines. I was not happy. Sometimes it takes God a long time to do something suddenly. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. There's so much there to unpack. And I have to say, from a spiritual aspect, that prayer that you prayed, although it was authentic in the moment, was quite an, let's say, spiritually immature prayer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness, Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, well, then that's the point, right? So in that environment, you are just a, it's like a baby, right? A baby cries and we're not mad at the baby because it needs food or that it can't walk. We just attend to it. And that's really where God met me is you are a spiritual infant. But here's the thing, just like Jesus said, all it takes is a mustard seed of faith. And that's essentially what I had. I did have a mustard seed of faith and God took that. And like I said, 5 years later, did something special with it.
Yeah. And it's so amazing, isn't it? How he can work instantaneously or overnight, or sometimes if you really need it, and usually you do, it's a slow process.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the time frame, I mean, it's been close to 15 years now. I look back, it was a year later that I started to really realize that prayer was answered. I'll give you an example. In a year, just a year, 12 months. So I talk about 5 years to that dream job, but in just 12 months, I had a new house that we owned in what I call suburbia USA, but we had sidewalks, which I thought was the coolest thing. I felt like I was in Mayberry because I grew up in a lower income, not subsidized housing, but small houses, kind of, we used to call it the hood. And it just wasn't that nice, and that's okay. Nothing against that. It's just that this was so drastically different from 12 months prior. Not only that, but my wife and I were together. I mean, we had kind of made a decision to stick it out and not only work through my jail stuff, because I had a couple of weeks of what we call straight time, and that would have ended up being months. But I was fortunate, another God moment, that the attorney got the judge to convert it to weekends. So that I could just drive to or be dropped off at the jail for the weekend, either do landscaping or just sit in the jail during the weekend. So got to see my kids and work during the week. And then that was done within a few months as well. And as a first-time home buyer, we could audit our taxes to get a bunch of cash back. And so we were able to buy appliances. I mean, we really went from, this kind of dilapidated looking living to quite nice of a lifestyle. My wife had a great job. And that summer, I got to spend more time with the kids than I ever had before. It was a great, and I had not made Jesus Lord of my life yet, right? That was just the save me prayer is what I call it. But making Jesus Lord came later. It was actually January 24th, 2010. That's kind of a whole nother story. But again, 12 months when you're looking at jail seems like a really long time. But as I look back on it, it was in the blink of an eye. We had just a complete turnaround. It's comical to me often because I call 2009 the year of victory, but I didn't even give my life to the Lord and make him Lord, as in like a commanding officer, until 2010. But because so many turnarounds happened in that one time. I'll give you another example. Here's one I just thought of. The old landlord had on his lease, it said first and last month's rent. Right. It used that verbiage. So we didn't give him the last month's rent because that was part of the deposit that we gave when we initially rented. So he actually took us to court over that. We're like, no, you have that. And he said, no, that's your deposit. I said, well, your lease says last month's rent. And so we are the type of people, even in that state, to leave a place worse than we found it. And so we had, cleaned the place. I painted, carpet cleaned. I, power washed the deck, all this kind of stuff that most tenants wouldn't do, but we did it just because that's how we are. And so when we got into that courtroom that day, my wife and I remember together, we did so well that once the case was over, of course we won. Here's what was so interesting. The bailiff came outside into the lobby of the courtroom and just looked at my wife and I and said, you guys did really good in there. We were like, well, thank you. Yeah. We try to do a good job wherever we go. And just was, again, not disciples of Jesus yet.
Right.
Just trying to be together and, treat people with respect and do the right thing. And that's really, those were the victories that we celebrated just by making a decision to stop with the nonsense and all, of course, the drinking and like I said, the debauchery, all that. Just that good decision will change your life dramatically. But again, once you make Jesus Lord, that's when the real ride begins.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I just wonder, did you just have to get to a new level of low in order for you to get for your mind to change and be like, I just don't want this for myself anymore?
Yeah. The veterans will appreciate what happened because once I got, so there was the DUIs and, looking down the barrel of the jail. I think my arraignment was coming up or something, some step in the process. I can't remember if that's the exact term. I remember trying to, now mind you, when you get your second DUI in 12 months, they revoke your license. So I had no license and not even a restricted. I did get the restricted later. At this point, this was summer of 2008. Before that prayer, I said, I had no license, but I was going to drive to the store to get some cigarettes. And for all the smokers out there, you need to quit. I quit in 2009, so I don't smoke anymore. But I was leaving to get some cigarettes, and I got to this stop sign just outside of the little cul-de-sac thing. And a Hanover police, this is Hanover, Virginia, Hanover County Police Sheriff drove by, and he wasn't looking for me or anything like that. Like he wasn't, he didn't know my car or anything. I freaked out. I was gripping the steering wheel.
Your
But
conscience kicked in, didn't it?
oh yeah, and
Yeah.
it hit me hard. I wrote a story about that moment, and later that's when I was told that, hey, that's the same thing that returning veterans experience from PTSD. And
Mm,
so that was when I learned that we can experience PTSD of life. It doesn't just have to be combat.
mm,
Because if you think about it from a spiritual perspective, we are in a spiritual war. I was experiencing that 100%. And it was the culmination of 10 to 12, 15, however many years of just lying and just,
mhm,
when your soul and your heart don't match, like it doesn't, the way you were supposed to act and the way you're acting, when that doesn't match, that adds up over time. And I
mm.
experienced that physically. And I drove back to the house, which is, of course, half a block away, and parked and called my wife, said, look, I can't even leave the house. If you could get me some cigarettes on the way home, that'd be great. And she's like, hey, don't worry about it, honey. But that's just an example of how when you get to the point where rock bottom is the only place you are, I guess, you have to turn to some higher power, because
Mhm.
it's not in your control. You can't control everything. And that's, we were kind of talking about that jokingly before the interview started, trying to control everything for a negative outcome, which is essentially what I was doing. It only goes so far. You just can't do that. And then all these things kept happening to me.
Mhm.
Of course, they were the result of my bad decisions,
Mhm.
but it didn't seem like, it just seemed like everything bad was happening to me, right? We don't want to go.
Right.
So when you finally own it, you have to give that to something, some higher power. And that's really where my walk of faith began, right there.
I've heard that, everybody serves something, right? Everybody's got something they're serving. It may not be a good thing.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that, when you said, well, at that point I had to choose, I think at that point you had to kind of start to revisit that and be like, who am I serving? I think I'm only serving myself right now. This is a completely self-focused lifestyle, and that is not getting me anywhere where I want to be. And this is how I feel, because your heart and soul, is that what you said? Heart and spirit, or heart and soul were not aligned?
Yeah, your heart or your spirit and your soul are not lined
Yeah.
up. So your soul
Yeah.
is the mind, will, and the emotions. Your heart is more like, in a spiritual sense, it's really your conscience, how you
Mhm.
commune with God or the spirit, and then there's a third sense of the heart. I'm forgetting,
You
but
wrote it in here.
it's that other step. Did I? Oh, awesome.
Spirit, communion, conscience, and intuition.
Intuition, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
those
important.
insights that you get, right? So as
Mhm.
believers, we have access to God's insights. But what I say is, if your spirit isn't with the Lord Jesus, then whose insights are you listening to? Because not all the
Right.
thoughts that go through your head are yours. That was
Right.
another huge moment for me to learn, is that, we've got sin built into all the physical part of ours. Our soul is the battleground. And of
Right.
course, even as believers, we got the heart of Jesus, but we have to still fight every day.
This is so important that you're saying this, that the soul is the battleground. I never hear this, especially from someone who is a business consultant. And my personal sense is that the heart and soul of business in America, of America itself, is being degraded to such a degree that we have just hollowed out to a point where it's quite scary, to be honest. And I know there are a lot of us still that are in that spiritual battleground. We understand and see it for what it truly is, and we are fighting the good fight, right? There are many of us out there, but this isn't something that's just like freely talked about or understood by the masses. So could you unpack that a little bit more? Because I feel like that is the essence of the our future, really. That if we don't get a grasp on that and understand what kind of battleground we are currently in, that this might be a scary place where we go next.
Yeah, it is scary. It should be scary. If one of the things I've been listening to a podcast is the Hillsdale Dialogues. It's Hugh Hewitt and Dr. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College.
Mhm.
They mostly talk about history, but what I love about it is they give a neutral perspective of the facts of current events that are based on historic events in this country. So you get the present and the past at the same time, and they're not pushing an agenda.
Mhm.
They're not saying that you should be a Democrat or a Republican or anything like that, because you can watch the news and a number of podcasts and you're going to hear an agenda. And
Yeah.
that's certainly what they, that's fine. I'm not even criticizing that. If you watch my YouTube show, you're going to hear an agenda. It's faith, leadership, and business, right? So I get it. These guys are just talking about old things that are good, like Plato's Republic. Well, they just finished this series on Churchill's, what's the name of the book? It's a series, The World Crisis. And I bought the volumes, but I haven't read them yet. So I'm not quoting the volumes, but just them. And what they're comparing this to is Germany's buildup back before World War I is the same as China's buildup right now. And instead of Britain, it's the United States. And a comical component to this dynamic that I just recently learned was that we have a certain budget to make a certain amount of submarines every year. And I think it's 2.5 a year. I'm not quite sure on that exactly, but the exact numbers are less important once you hear the rest. And that is half of the parts or most of the parts come from China. Okay. So now they're part of our military industrial complex. But here's what's funny to me. They only give us 1.5 worth per year. So they're actually controlling our production process or production rate, which is inconsistent with the policy set by Congress. And, it's that's the existential threat right now, in my opinion. But to your point about spirit and the battleground and the soul, it goes back 50, 60, 70 years. I personally believe that business owners who, as much as we want to blame the politicians, the people that elect them, which is our vote, in addition to all the money spent, those are the ones that are guiding policy, right? And, as much as people want to talk smack about Trump or whatever, that's what they hate about him, is nobody's pulling his strings, and it drives them crazy, right? So the point about policy is that 50, 60, 70 years ago, people saw an opportunity when China started opening its doors to American manufacturing. So they're like, wow, look at this cheap labor. Look how much money we can make. So if they were thinking to themselves, we should undermine the CCP so that we can free the Chinese people, which is what a Jesus follower would initially think, they're not drooling over the profit margins, then we wouldn't be in this situation we are right now. In just the last 25 years, we've exported 5 million jobs to China, almost 2 million to Mexico. And even Mexico is less of a concern, in my opinion, because they're not our enemy based on, fundamental government policy. It's like India right now, right? India is a monotheistic country, but because they're democratic, then we share that value for the power of the people to choose its leaders. China doesn't have that, or the CCP doesn't have that. So at a fundamental level, we've always known since 1949 that they were, but we ignored that. And that's the problem I have. So if we can take back the marketplace and make those good quality, faith-driven decisions every single day that benefit people instead of profit, then we will be able to reclaim this. And candidly, it's a little scary because I have some clients that are construction, some that are machinist companies, some that are in healthcare. Pretty much kind of my background essentially is where these clients come from. But America's forgot how to make a thing. And if you're going to win a war, you need to be able to make a thing and make it fast. A new way of war is drones that could blow up an aircraft carrier. That's a concern because that technology exists right now. So the arms race would involve, hey, how many drones can I make and how fast? For example, Israel, they make their own. Probably a good idea. And what I love about Israel is they are a people that is united around one cause. And the one cause for them is not only serving their God, but making sure that they exist. So all of them are united. So they have, superior technology in farming, and other technology. I'm not an expert on that, but that's what I love about them. And if the American people would unite around the Constitution as we're supposed to, and that was our thing, because again, we have freedom of religion here. So we don't all have to be Christians. In fact, America is one of the few, if not the only country in its history that didn't have anti-Semitic language in its founding document. Most other countries did. Most people don't know that. I didn't know that until I read a book by Dennis Prager here recently. If I knew him, he would probably kick me for forgetting the name of the book. But the point is that it was really good, and it gives you that background. And that's the whole point, is that we have been friendly to other nations and other religions and other doctrines of belief ever since day one, not without our own challenges. But that's the whole point, is that the CCP will never change. Right. If the CCP exists, they will be communist. And of course, it's just another form of slavery as far as I'm concerned. So, we talk about America had slaves and that's all bad, but yet we do business with China. So
I know there are a lot of moral aspects to it that just don't make any sense at all.
And it's a bigger problem than people are. I would say politicians or policymakers, they're scared to fight that problem because there's so much money involved and so many.
And China's playing the long game. There's no doubt about it. And the first example of that was back, what did you say, in 49 or whatever, when we made the decision to do business with them because we were so greedy for profit. So
they knew that. Oh, here's another real quick thing about China. I just learned this. There was an article in the Christian space. I think it was Andy Stanley who first quoted it, written in 2011. And I just dug this up because I wanted to read part of it again. But China did a study, back in the early 2000s as to why the Western democratic governments or societies were so prosperous. And the conclusion that they drew from all that was because it was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. But here's what's interesting. When that article was written, the thought process was, and China even said that they're going to be nice about Christian. But China always says that kind of stuff. If you read Kissinger's book on China, you can see how they, back in the 1800s and even before, they play that long game. They kind of fake left and go right, or maybe they'll fake left and right and go center. Like that's how they roll. So their intention was never to be nice about Christians. And we've seen that in Hong Kong. Their intention was to understand what made us prosperous and undermine that. And that's the reason why there's so much emphasis on Chinese money that's going into our higher ed. It doesn't surprise me that Harvard gets $3 billion a year from China, and that they have all their wokeism ideologies and their president who plagiarizes, but that's her truth and all that nonsense. That's China undermining the things that make us great.
Exactly right. Yeah. And they're also infiltrated into our food system as well. I mean, there isn't a system in our country they don't have their fingers in.
And that's just the existential threat. The moral one, the spiritual battle, that's a whole other topic. And, I'm glad we've got time. I love the long form type of podcast, because I'm a listener. I'll just listen and listen and listen. And, so this is great. This is a great environment.
So you talked about the enemy at the gates, one being it's important that we be a spiritual defender, which I cannot agree with enough. And the truest battleground is our soul. And then the national defenders was the topic of China and other countries that are playing the long game, where we're here in this little, analogy here I'm having in my head is we're over here in our little sandbox, like throwing stones at each other over stupid things that don't matter, right? That we're making into bigger issues than they really are, being distracted by all of this. Meanwhile, these bigger things are happening that actually matter a lot more, that are going to cause a lot more trouble for us in the long run. And so I think that distraction that we see on so many levels is part of the spiritual battleground that you're talking about. And it comes through, unfortunately, even stronger for us now as we gain in technology. We've got these, devices with us all the time. And more I see it as a threat really to our souls, to not be able to keep focused on our true north, which in my opinion is Christ. And so for me, you're smiling. For me, I've had to implement discipline in my life to try to create barriers, like intentionally create barriers to those distractions, because I do see that spiritual battleground much more clearly than I used to. And I've implemented practices in my daily life to be disciplined in that area, to be in the word more, to understand the truth and to know it. And I'm still very green, right? I have so much further to go. And that's really part of the whole point, is you never arrive, right?
Oh, yeah. But Jesus is the only one who arrived. And that was when he ascended.
That's right.
Yeah,
and so, but those are things that I personally have implemented in my life, both from a spiritual aspect, and then also other defenses, right? And this is Defenders Live. We're talking about defense here. So I've had that spiritual defense in my life, but also from a physical aspect, creating an environment of health and well-being in my life has been a really important thing I've done over the last year. And I've noticed that as I've created discipline in that space of physical fitness, that has cleared my mind and created some emotional fitness for me, so I can discern and make better decisions. And it's just created an overall stronger person. And that then permeates into your family and your business, does it not?
It absolutely does. You really laid that out perfectly, because that's exactly it. If you think about the gate to your soul, that's your five senses: touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. What's a great example? A great example would be in December of 2023, Jerry and his family, for the first time together, embarked on a cruise.
Boy.
I'll leave the company unnamed, just so as not to disparage them, because yes, the cruise was amazing for all the family members. But what Jerry noticed most was that the five senses, the gates to our soul, were bombarded with all manner, like I say, all manner of debauchery. Like I don't drink. I haven't drank since 2008. So of course I wasn't, up all night drinking and everything else. And I actually did sleep well. One of the things I'll tell you I enjoyed real quick. We were in rough seas. We left out of Baltimore, and it was rough seas all the way down to the Bahamas. And so this massive cruise ship was literally 40 feet up and down, swells, that kind of thing. And it was just raw. It was a hammock. So I would take these afternoon nap. I don't nap. Maybe close my eyes for a second to recharge if it's been a long day. I don't nap. I napped on that cruise ship. And so my cabin was quiet, but everywhere else, your ears, your eyes, your taste buds, not pornography. That's a bad way to say it, but like bathing suits and all that kind of stuff. Everybody's just wandering around.
Temptation. Yeah.
Yeah. Temptation. That's the best way to put it. all of the five senses were being just attacked like crazy. And so I remember thinking that I'm getting up early at like 9:30 or 10, right? So that I get to the omelet line, and everybody's rushing to the omelet line in their pajamas. And we're all like, you're not shoving one another, but you're kind of like trying to like beat the person that's beside, like that. On this cruise, I realized that I saw the worst in everybody.
Oh.
And it wasn't that people were rude. It was kind of rude in the sense that like this 12-year-old was cursing like she was in the Marine Corps about how good the food was, right? So that kind of, it wasn't like she was like cursing at a staff member. It was just all bets are off type of thing. And and that's where I thought of, wow, that the enemy is at the gate right here. We are just immersed in this. And it's not that we won't go on a cruise again. We'll probably get on a different cruise liner. I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, in addition to the older two that are 18 and 20. But so for the 12-year-old daughter, on the elevator, and the walls were painted with like kind of half naked ladies, and you could see kind of parts that you probably shouldn't, and that kind of stuff. She even said that it made her uncomfortable to see that.
Yeah.
And so it definitely was a debaucherous environment. But that's really what you can think of when you think of enemy at the gates, is your five senses. So just like you, instead of waking up to emails, you wake up and do, like, I have a routine where I brush, floss, all that kind of stuff, get my coffee, and then I get right in the word. And I don't even look at my work phone. Because even if I look at my calendar, I'm starting to think about the day's activities. I want the word to be the first thing that I get exposed to.
Yeah.
And that right there alone will be immense protection for you throughout the day. If it's, for me, it started at 15 minutes. If I'm lucky, I'll get to hang out for an hour and a half, 2 hours. I mean, if I get to writing, let's say I just cruise right into writing something, I might be there all day. Some days I forget to eat, and that's not good. But, but when you get rolling, it's like, and I literally, look, how Jesus said to the enemy, he said, man shall not live off bread, but off every word from the mouth of God.
Yeah.
Well, that's really what it comes down to, and I found that if you are feeding spiritually every morning, it's going to be a gift, and it's going to be a not so awesome gift, because I won't call it a curse. It's a gift in the sense that you get fed and you're protected throughout the day, but if you stop, you're going to like deteriorate fast. Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
This pastor friend of mine, I'm going to call him out because he's awesome. His name's Jeff Hill, Destiny Church in Chester, Virginia. Awesome place. That's not my home church, but he's a friend. He said it's likened to an apple. He said when you take a Twinkie out of the package and set it on the counter, it will look the same in 30 days.
Yeah.
So if you have never been exposed to the word, you might be kind of like a Twinkie. Like you just don't need it. But once you get that living word, that life, that true life, that truth in your heart, you're like an apple. You cut open an apple, and within minutes, it starts to turn brown. And that's what we're like when we don't have the word.
Yeah, that's really good. Because today, I will admit, has been one of those days that if I wouldn't have started my day off right, I already knew before, I just knew that had to be a non-negotiable for me, starting my day off that way, because if I wouldn't even be able to be sitting here with you right now in a real true discussion. Right. Because what I'd done in the past, Jerry, was I had let the world control me instead of me controlling, like my day controlled me instead of me controlling my day. Yeah. And that's that switch that I've made, that shift that I've made in multiple ways. And it's been a slow change. It's not like I just came out of the gate and figured it all out. That's not how it works. But as I've slowly integrated what my non-negotiables are now, and then the rest of everything else can just like fit wherever it fits. It has made all the difference in the world. And today I had another appointment. And I remember specifically telling this gal I said to her, she says, "So what do you got going on today?" And I started saying a couple things. I looked at her, I go, "Do you really want to know?" And she kind of smiled at her. She's like, "Yeah, I get it. It's a lot of stuff, isn't it?" And I said, "You know what my real goal is for today?" And she says, "What?" I go, "My real goal for today is that no matter what comes my way, I will not allow myself to panic. Ooh. I will not allow myself to go into a place of fear or worry, because everything falls apart when you allow yourself to do that." And so that was my goal for today. And I'm only halfway through the day right now. And I still am, sometimes hour to hour, depending on the email that comes in or the phone call I get or the text or whatever, and I'm in the middle of like in that personal growth journey of being like, feeling that moment come on inside me, feeling what that feels like. And then being like, but wait, I can choose not to react to this right now in the way I usually react to it. And I really think that awareness is key to growth of any kind. And I think for me, I get that from the word, because I remember what the truth is and I don't believe the lies anymore. And not always am I that way, right? I mean, right. But when I can do that and I can execute on that, it just changes everything. So it's those little things, Jerry, I think those little tiny moments in your day that can make a huge impact and then can slowly start to grow in such a good and positive way that they start permeating in every other area of your life. And I think people want like a silver bullet to everything. They want to be able to hit the easy button,
I
right?
certainly do. Yes.
We all want
I'm
that,
the worst.
but that's not how it works. And actually, if you're really in the process and not being so like, and we talk about this in firearms training all the time of being process focused versus outcome focused, but it applies to life. And I think to business too, because when you're focused on outcome all the time, you're never able to be fully where you are, to be able
Oh,
to
that's
do
so
your
good.
best work. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because this is this is supposed to be about business. So let's talk about, because we're going like in all kinds of
I love
places
it
here.
though. This
Yeah.
and it's it if here's what's great about where we started and where we're going. I'll just edify that because you're the maestro. If you start with the big thing, the big why, whether it's Jesus, whether it's the existential threat to the country, then you can understand how important that moral decision is when it comes to your bottom line and your profit and loss statement, because that's what they were looking at. They were looking at, hey, I can save $8 an hour on labor if I make this car somewhere else, or whatever it is. Because, we all look at labor rates.
But
I
that
have
does come at a
employees.
cost later, a different kind of cost that I don't think they
Right.
considered.
Right. And you mentioned hollowing out, and it might be in my thing as well, but that was the phrase I heard years ago. And I wondered, and then you hear things like Rust Belt, right? So we've got hollowing out of America. We've got the Rust Belt. Those aren't things that should describe the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Not the Midwest, particularly with its manufacturing base. And, what's interesting is, people from these areas will tell you that it's sitting there. The factory's there. It's just not open. There's chains on the gate, right? So it's there. We just need to do it. And in fact, I remember when I was getting out of the Marine Corps, it was 2007. The recession hadn't set in yet, but it was on its way. And so nobody was hiring, corporate executives. I had just gotten my MBA. Despite being a highly functioning alcoholic, I still managed to get my master's degree while on active duty. But you said it best. You said, who was that? What was my motivation? My motivation was me. I wanted to be the guy with the master's degree. And I'll tell you why, because my first round of college, I had dropped out. I dropped out of college, and then a few years later, joined the Marines after 9/11, just a few months. And that sounds super patriotic. And sure, there was some patriotism there because I was in the ROTC at Virginia Tech. I was an officer candidate for a couple of years. So I understood that, mentality, part of the Marine Corps officer detachment there. So there was some patriotism there, but more so it was like self-preservation. I knew that I needed to change my life, and I knew the Marine Corps would do it for me. So I just went to boot camp, and the wake-up call was the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. But I was still doing it for me. I wanted me to be the person that people could look at and look up to, but not for the reasons that the Lord prescribes. It's because I wanted people to not worship per se, but that's essentially what it comes down to. I wanted to be, this shiny thing, that people looked at and said, oh, he's the hero or whatever, that kind of thing. And so that's why I was able to get that stuff done. But again, all that comes to a head because when you're only living for yourself, I mean, I had kids too. And, one of the differentiating things about being a father, when they were little, my older two, the 18 and 20-year-old, when they were little, I wanted to be a great dad, but I wanted to be a great dad because I wanted to be a great dad. It wasn't about them. And so when you replace your heart with the spirit of Jesus, love becomes your motivation. So now we're disciplining them correctly. We're raising them right, giving them limits on their phone use, no matter how much they kick and scream, that kind of thing. I don't think would have been possible if I would not have converted to a Christian, because I wouldn't have understood that love for them is the motivation, not love for me and my ego and all that. And that applies to business too. I think these business owners of years ago wanted to be the hero. Maybe they wanted to, hey, look at all this money we're going to make, and we're doing a good thing because China's opening up, and maybe we'll influence them. You're not going to influence the CCP. That's their jam. And it's like, I think 40 million people died in that whole revolution too. I mean, that was a bad thing. People give Hitler a lot of, and of course he was horrible. Stalin was even worse than Hitler, but Mao Zedong was worse than both of them. But most people don't think about that when they think of China. They think of, hey, this thing I bought on Amazon is so cheap because it's made over there. You said it best. They play the long game. And if people don't defend their family, then you won't be able to defend the country.
Right.
Because, look at the Marine Corps standards. I'm not going to say that my Marine Corps was super better than anyone today, because Marines of the 60s said the same thing. But we didn't have like a stress card.
A stress card? What's that?
That's something I heard about. I don't know if it's in Marine Corps boot camp, but it's in other boot camps, where if you're feeling too much stress, you pull this card, and then the drill instructor apparently has to leave you alone. I don't know if it's implemented in the Marines yet, but I know that it was in other services. I just can't remember which one, but it's a stress card. And in my mind, I'm like, that's the opposite of that. Right? Like the whole point of boot camp of any kind is to put undue stress, so that when you are under stress, you can make good decisions. And that right there alone, the Chinese are reveling in that. Or I wouldn't say the Chinese people, but the CCP, they're loving that, because that means we can't handle combat. We can't handle those things that we need to be prepared for. And if we raise children in our family, the family is the strongest unit. That's the reason why the enemy is going after gender, because if you can get a guy, particularly men, to question whether or not they should be men and to lead their families. Now, I was a stay-at-home dad for almost 2 years, so I'm going to get to the gender part of the roles in the house. But in a spiritual sense, man, God looks at man and says, hey, you're responsible for this. All right. But I'm giving you all of my grace and love. And he said, oh, by the way, present your wife blameless to me, just as Christ presented the church blameless to God. So we have an obligation. So if you can get a man to question his own gender, now you're questioning the foundational thing that puts him in that particular role in the family. And then the whole thing falls apart. And that's the point. If you undermine the family, then you undermine the thing that produces a responsible citizen. And I'm not saying that a male and female, husband and wife, is the only way to produce a responsible citizen. Jesus had a blended family, right? His dad was different than his brother's dad and sisters. And that's the point, is that there was a father and there was a mother, and they were teaching a thing, which in this case was to be a good disciple unto the Lord. And we need to teach that. We need to teach people. We need to defend the freedom that we have and teach people why it's so important. I was blessed a few years ago to get to know Dr. Bruce Hallman. He was the chancellor, first he was the president of University of Richmond. University of Richmond was kind of was on its way out in the 60s. It's very well known now. We call it the University of Rich Kids because it's $200,000 a year to go or something astronomical. But Dr. Bruce Hallman was a Marine Corps veteran from World War II, and he was living kind of a crazy life. He joined the Marines, and then he made faith and his family his foundation for his life, and ultimately got his PhD, became Chancellor of UW, on and on. Well, in the last 20 years of his life, and remember, this is a suit and tie guy, right? Suit and tie guys running around the country on a Harley, an Ultra Glide, if I remember, and he's telling the veterans, the World War II veterans, so from essentially probably the late 80s all the way up to his death in 2018 or 2019, he spent time telling the veterans to tell their story. And I don't care what war you fought in, what time you were in, peacetime, whatever, you need to tell your story. You need to tell why that was so important, because your kids need to know it. Because if you think about the 60s were a lack of understanding of why freedom is so important. And World War II veterans weren't telling their story. So the greatest generation dropped the ball. Then it became a domino effect after that, because again, now you've got people that don't put faith first. They don't put freedom first. They put their own interests first.
Right.
So that whole point, that starts right there in the family. And again, it was great. I'm not even a combat Marine, so I can't tell you that it was a thing that people would get over easy or anything like that. But I can tell you that I've been in veteran writing groups. So I've heard a lot of stories, and telling the story is not only cathartic, but it is super important. I'll give you an example real quick. The Mighty Pen Project is a nonprofit that was founded by a friend of mine named David L. Robbins. David and I are separated by 25 years in age. We are separated in politics. He's on the other side. I'm more conservative. He's more progressive liberal. But we remain friends because we both agree that good values and veterans telling their stories are important. David's a world famous writer. He lives in Richmond here, but he teaches veterans creative writing for free. And what I learned from him, not only how to write, but also that telling the story is so important because others need to know. So these stories that are told, he's now put it into a podcast. There's a VCU archive of all these stories, but veterans have to tell their story. That is the foundational focal point that kids need to know. Like if you ask my kid what's important, they're going to tell you my faith, my family, and then finance. They know I've been telling them for 10 years. And I think it starts with mom and dad.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, that all boils down to one of my good friends who's a pastor says it starts at the kitchen table. And that's exactly true.
Okay.
And all the people in the world that are, especially in our nation, who are concerned right now, who feel like they're at their wits' end and don't know what to do, what kind of action can I take? How can I help improve the conditions of society? Well, it starts at your kitchen table. Yeah. You can make change right where you're planted right now. So I think that's a great thing to do. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about business a little bit more specifically, because we've kind of talked about it a little bit. We've intertwined it into our conversation. And I love how you did that. But you specifically consult with businesses, and tell me exactly, let me look at your bio again here. Driven results to small and middle market those small and middle market business owners? And then for those that don't know, what are KPI driven results?
So there's a way to improve a business. I believe it starts qualitatively. Qualitative meaning leadership. Like I said before, or initially in the bio, I love to create leaders worth following. And the content that I use is often what I call biblically based, but secular safe. And that is that it doesn't matter what boardroom I'm standing in. I can cite scripture if people want, but we don't need to, because we feel like if there's someone that doesn't subscribe to the Christian faith that is in that room, we want them to be able to play too. And so influence starts that way, with being a leader worth following. But a lot of your small businesses, and small, like federal government says, I think 250 employees or less is considered small. So those businesses tend to be founded by someone who's still running the company, or somehow they're involved in the operation. They don't often have a lot of leadership training. They know the ins and outs of the operation, but they lack two things. One, they lack a CEO mentality, and they lack an ability or a process for raising up leaders within that organization to carry on the legacy after they're gone, or if they just get to the end of their rope. A good example would be if you started a business, let's say you were the beginner, and you started it and you grew it, your bandwidth is probably going to get maybe 18 hours a day if you really want to push yourself hard. At the 5 to 10 million realm. You're going to need some other leaders when you get in that area. Otherwise, it won't grow. So they're trying to grow the company. But another component to that is, well, I've got these 25, 30, 100 employees. When I leave, there's no one to run it. I don't want to shut it down. All these people are not going to have a job. So we create a legacy. And this legacy can be both with the company and in the kingdom, I like to say, the kingdom of Jesus. Because if you pick your top three, like Jesus had Peter, James, and John, and you intentionally begin to disciple them, not only for the business operation, but for also a faith component, they're going to not only be beholden to you, but also beholden to the company that created a lifestyle and an understanding of life that's so important to them. They're going to share that legacy with you. So on a qualitative perspective, that's really the goal, is to raise up healthy leaders that can not only lead well, but also multiply themselves. Because without multiplication, you're not going to grow. You can't grow outside your own limits. And that's really the biggest value the leadership component brings, particularly to those small and medium-sized businesses. Because even if you are a corporation, let's say you have 1,000 employees, there's no guarantee that the CEO has any true leadership training. They might have an MBA, but as a person who had an MBA, I can tell you that there wasn't a lot of leadership training. We studied civil tort, profit and loss statements, and cash flows, and all that, but not a lot of like actual leadership. Like, how do I handle a situation where we've got a team member that's mad at another team member and they're talking behind their back and all that? I mean, we use simple tools, pictures, videos, simple stuff that helps teach these concepts, that whether you're washing the dishes or whether you're the CEO, you can understand it. And we create a language of leadership. And now we're saying, okay, we have this personality lens called the 5 voices. You know, it's based on the Jungian archetypes, which is where Myers-Briggs comes from, but it's very easy to understand, right? So that's just an example of a language of leadership that we'll implement. When it comes to world-class KPIs, world-class to me is the leader of the pack. So if you look at, let's say, the big winners in the healthcare industry, right? So who's bringing 5-star outcomes and maximizing their dividends to their shareholders, right? So the patients are getting healed and the shareholders are getting theirs. If that would be a world-class company, in my opinion. Well, a lot of business owners manage the daily operation from what we call an L2 perspective, or the second tier leader perspective. They don't use CEO KPIs. They are too involved in the daily operation. So what we do is teach them to run the company based on not just revenue on your profit and loss statement, but revenue growth compared to the industry. That's a huge distinction. Because if your industry's growing at 6%, let's do this. If the industry's growing at 10% and you grew at 3%, well, 3% growth isn't bad. That's great. I'm glad you grew. But if the industry's outpacing that by 7%, then somebody else is getting your future market share. Now you're going to be out of business pretty soon because somebody's getting that money. That's just an example of a world-class KPI that we would implement in there. And managing that, or teaching leaders to manage from that perspective, is far more effective in the long term, because not only does it take them out, they have to then trust those leaders, because trust is huge. I have a pastor who teaches a lot. Yeah. We think money is the commodity here, but trust is the commodity, and trust is the commodity in the kingdom of Jesus as well. So if you raise up leaders in your organization, you're all speaking the same language of leadership. Now you have a culture of leadership, but it's based on quantifiable, measurable ROI. And that's really what we bring to the table, is that I can tell you that just teaching leadership, I'm going to reduce turnover quite a bit. In fact, for every leader that doesn't quit or you don't have to fire, well, I'm saving you double their salary on an annual basis. So that's a great ROI. But when I can say, hey, some of my clients, I have a client here recently who had a 260% increase in their net income in the first half of this year over last year.
Wow.
All right. So that's an example of teaching a leader how to manage the company at the CEO level. Because even if you have 40 employees or 100 employees, that doesn't mean that you're leading like a CEO. And that's an important distinction, because when I was in the hospitals, I didn't do patient care. I didn't sweep the floor or make the food. So I had to lead like a CEO. There was no choice, because Jerry wasn't trained for that. I was trained to lead through the directors and the other leaders. So when I got into small business, I had to learn that again, really, because you can get pulled in the weeds fast. But I found that there's so many people that their businesses within the next 10 years are going to close because they're just going to age out. But if we can raise up some leaders within, they can create a legacy for their family, a legacy for the future owner. Maybe you're not even worried about that. Maybe you just want to create something that you can sell. Well, it's a whole lot easier to sell a business that operates without you than requires you to be there for 10 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another component. If you have to be there every day, you're probably going to multiply around 2.5 of your net income or your discretionary cash without you having to do anything, or maybe just 2 hours a week, something like that. You're jumping up to 3.5, maybe a 5 times multiplier, maybe even higher, depending on what your systems look like. So you can really increase the value of your company if you focus on those things that make a company valuable, not just from your perspective of why is it so valuable to you, but what does the industry say the value of that company is?
I'm writing so many notes, I can't keep up.
That's quite all right. Yeah. That was a long spiel, but that's what a world-class KPI will do for a company and what's working for us.
Well, this is pretty cool. This is pretty exciting. I do have a couple of questions about this, though. You say that you train people to be better leaders, and I'm wondering, for some reason, I'm going back to the Apple analogy, and I'm wondering if it's similar in that leadership isn't just something that you download, right, from going to a conference, and then all of a sudden you have it, and then you go implement it into your business. Is it kind of like the Apple thing where you've got to continually keep growing and or you kind of use it or you lose it, sort of a thing? Or what is that? How do you put in tangible terms what leadership really is?
That's good. I have my own definition. There's tons. But my definition of leadership is the ability to influence someone to make a decision and act upon it, right? So if you want to be a boss, you can tell somebody to do a thing and they'll take action if they want to keep their job. But a leader is going to teach you how to make a decision and then act on it. And that to me is critical. So we raise up not only decision makers, but people that can disciple decision makers. And so to your point about the Apple, I believe that if you're not discipling people, if you're not training them somehow, and not only, of course, do you lack that legacy that's going to ensure the company and maybe even just the department, you don't have to be a business owner. I just happen to work with a lot of them. But, if you're a department head, that's the same thing. You need to, you've heard this before, you need to train yourself out of a job. Well, if you're scared that somebody's going to get your job because you're, an inferior leader, well, you can become a leader worth following if you practice. So what we do is we'll teach these leadership techniques. The first thing we say is teach this tool, whatever it may be, teach this leadership concept to your wife. That's the first place.
You have to know it before you can teach it.
That's right. So you study, you watch an 8-minute video, you fill out a little form real quick, then you go and teach your wife. She's like, oh, this is, silly. I'd love to see this act at home to get this done. Well, so now you've had this practice, and the person that's both going to be most supportive and most skeptical is the person that knows all your junk, your spouse or whoever you live with, maybe your children. When I first started teaching this, I taught my teenagers this stuff. And so now I'm beholden to that information. So if they know that dad has a weapon system, we use this lens called the 5 voices, and every voice has a weapon system. Mine is the Hulk.
The Hulk?
My weapon system is the Hulk. Yes, it's there's only about 4% of the population that has that weapon system. So what it really looks like is a baby throwing a But here's the point. What I learned later, because I studied this from the more of a psychological perspective, is that it's tied to that very thing that caused me to overdrink or overeat or over party or over whatever or overachieve. Yeah. It's just an overdoing it, right? So if you're angry, you essentially get drunk on your own anger. My wife told me that years ago. She said, it's like you're drunk on anger, you're slamming doors, yelling, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. When I was in the Marine Corps, I got really good at fixing doors. Why do we get good at fixing doors? Because we break them.
Not good.
And I'm not the first Marine to punch a door. But, as I got older, the weapon system became more obvious to me. So all personalities have a weapon system. Well, if I've taught the kids their weapon system and dad's weapon system, now I have to manage that weapon system. Because if the Hulk's coming, we need to know a couple things. You said this earlier in a different way. It's hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. I learned that in the rooms, the Alcoholics Anonymous. It spells halt. So before the Hulk comes out, Jerry needs to halt if he's hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And I don't always get ahead of it, but that's the thing. When you feel your blood pressure rising, and your weapon system might be passive aggressive behavior. It might be what we call a grenade launcher or a bulldozer, you know. And this can happen in the boardroom too. If you've ever known that really loud leader that just kind of bulldozes over everybody, well, that's their weapon system. They're either nervous or they're frustrated. And they might be frustrated that no one hears them. So we teach them to recognize these weapon systems and then use them at home, or teach this stuff to the house. And here's where the evangelism comes into play, because the most common response I get when I teach this material is, Jerry, yeah, this is working great with our team. We all love it. We love poking fun at each other's tendencies and all that. But my wife and I communicate better than ever. When I hear that,
there's a
I'm
ripple
like,
effect.
oh, that's so good. Because here's what that means. That means that there's tied to more than just money, which is essentially why people have a job. Well, now we've got that person's life partner, their spouse, involved in this transformation. And they're really excited. So, now the door is wide open for me to say things like, oh, that's great. Now, do you guys have any particular doctrine of faith that you follow? Because that'll really strengthen your relationship. Communication is important, but we need a relationship here. Right. And so if they say no, I'll say, well, have you ever considered going to church? And they might be in Oklahoma. It doesn't really matter. And then I can say, well, there's great information in the Bible about this very thing. Have you ever checked that out? You can have these kinds of conversations because you've established influence. You can't go into the boardroom talking like that, but you have to teach them a thing that now makes them open to hearing that, because you're not just Jerry the evangelist. You're someone that taught them a thing that has made their life better. And so when you teach them that in that way, they are naturally inclined to do that very thing. Because it's just like me. Like, it was business people in 2010, or late 2009, early 2010, that invited me to the Sunday service. They said, Jerry, come check this out. We got a great speaker. He's a guest speaker. He's going to be talking about his testimony where his daughter's ears were healed miraculously. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll come. And then I went to a couple of Sunday services, and then one time got saved. And that's when I made Jesus Lord. But that was in the marketplace that I was invited. I couldn't believe these guys. They had their cake and ate it too. It's Christian business leaders. That's it.
What a concept.
I mean, I was so jealous, because I worked all those years to be this, hotshot business guy, and I ended up in jail.
Yeah.
You're out drinking, you're doing it, you're at a networking event, right? And it is networking, but you're drinking. And so, why are you the last one to leave? So I still go to networking events. I just don't drink. And so lo and behold, I'm out of there in an hour, right? Home before dinner, and that kind of thing. And see, that's the point, is that when you influence somebody to the degree that their family is improved, and they learn this in the boardroom, now they learn to do that to other people. And we implement this language of leadership. And so once we've done that, now that opens the door to the whole team doing those things that are in health, like that represent healthy leadership. Now everyone wants to do their job better, and it no longer becomes the Jerry show. Jerry doesn't need to stand in the corner telling them what to do every 10 seconds. They all know what to do. And that's the real values, because once I establish the language of leadership, now we can bring in some of these KPIs, and people aren't going to think that it's a disciplinary thing to have to meet a certain metric, particularly in sales and revenue. Well, now it's a thing because, hey, we're all in this together. We're this team, because we've galvanized around this language of leadership.
This is big. This is a huge shift. I think that if we could integrate this into many businesses across America, it could change a lot of things for the better.
I agree. That's our goal. And here's what happens when you are taught the language of leadership, and your team is taught the same language. Therein becomes your accountability, right? So we talked earlier about China and them chasing those profit margins. Well, EBITDA and net income and all that's a great margin to chase, of course. That's one of the things I learned as a new business owner was, don't chase revenue, chase profit. Because I sacrificed profit for revenue at one point, and chase cash flow, right? So we got those things. All those are important. But if you start making those poor decisions, and let's say you're the chief operating officer, executive VP, and you've got a bunch of VPs working for you, well, and you make a decision, and because they have to execute that decision. They know what you're thinking. They know what you're doing. It's not like you can do it in secret. Because when you're at the executive level, you have to, or any leadership level, but quite frankly, you're going to have to lead through others. So they know that you're getting off track on morals and ethics. They're going to start questioning that. And why is it that we have that door open? Because I remember when I was in corporate America, there was no emotional safety in the boardroom. I remember I ran these post-acute rehab centers, long-term care centers. They were always 300, 400 miles from corporate. So I remember driving to corporate and always trying to think, how am I going to make a contribution to this budget meeting that's not going to make me sound like an idiot, or that's not going to make somebody angry, right? Because why? There's no emotional safety. You can't just speak out in these meetings. You have to curate what you say. Otherwise, you're going to, you're basically not going to get what you want, but you're going to offend somebody or maybe get looked down upon. Because again, people are carrying around all this insecure baggage, and they're just not really willing to let go of it. But we can teach them that, hey, That weapon system, Jerry, is the Hulk. It's a weapon system that goes with your personality. It's not a thing that you can't overcome. You can get ahead of it. It's we're putting a name on this thing that has, caused your credibility to be reduced over the years. That's really what it comes down to. If you got this is what I love. I love for these CEOs to send me that hotshot VP that always gets the job done, but everybody hates it. Send me that guy. Right? Because you give me 3 to 6 months, we're gonna have a transformation, and then they're gonna be super powerful. Then you're gonna promote them. I guarantee it, because they already get the job done. They just don't know what they sound like on the other side of themselves. We hold up that mirror in a nice way using these leadership lenses, and all of a sudden they're like, "That's what I sound like."
Awareness is really key.
It is.
And in order to be really, have true awareness and make any kind of change in your life, I mean, the first thing you need is to be humble, really, and open, which is, what's talked about in the Bible. And so it all boils down to heart at the end of the day. And I think that is part of what your mission is, really, just within the confines of the business world. So that's really cool. I love what you're doing. That's a cool mission to be on, Jerry. It looks like you really got the skill set for that too. And you've really paid your dues, so to speak, as well. I mean, that's quite a story. I'm surprised. Have you written a book yet?
I was just sitting here thinking, I got to mention the book. Okay. So the answer is yes. And the first time I wrote a book was when I was a stay-at-home dad. That was about 10 years ago. Praise the Lord, that thing was not published and distributed. I later put it in the hands of a publisher. It was a self-publishing endeavor. I didn't mass produce it. But that guy looked at it, he's like, "Jerry, this is like 3 books in one." He was like, we gotta do something with this. And I said, "Well, let's not worry about that. I just wanted to show you that I've written something." And he said, "Okay, what you got going on?" And we talked more. And then I wrote another book that's not quite done. But because all right, I'll give you an example. That's a leadership book, but it's written in a fiction point of view. Fiction is hard to write for me because you have to stay in the point of view of the characters. So that's kind of an ongoing thing, and it's almost done. I just want to put some psychology stuff in it. So I've got to kind of go back through it a little bit. But here's what I'm most excited about, because it speaks to everything we started with. This book is called Faith-Driven Leadership. The subtitle is God's Blueprint for World-Class Business.
The one you're finishing?
Yeah, I'm almost done. I just started this thing like a month ago.
Wow.
But that's why I'm so excited, because I was going to partner with another author on a different business book, and I got started on writing my contribution. And he's like, "Jerry, you really only need about 10,000 words." I'd already written like 15. And so what I realized was I got my own book that I've got to write here. And this is so different than anything I'd written before, because the fiction-ish one was short stories about the various things like what you read in the article, that kind of stuff. But from the point of view of me back then, basically in a counselor office or a psychologist's office, I haven't decided yet. But this book is a call to action, and it says, okay, why do we need to make a change in the business community in America? Because again, I've never worked overseas, so I can't speak to that. And then the second part is, what is a world-class business, right? What does that look like? If the owner can disciple others, has time for that, for his family, and to raise up leaders, if the shareholders are getting what they asked for, maybe more, and if the clients are getting what they were promised for their money, then that's a world-class business. It doesn't have to be in the Fortune 500. And so how do we create that? Well, then the last majority of the book is me taking God's word and explaining to CEOs and business owners, or basically anybody that wants to be a faith-driven leader, how God's word has everything you need to be a successful business person. It has everything in there. And the more I've looked for it, the more I've found it. And what's interesting is I didn't even have the idea for this book until a month ago. But since the beginning of the year, I've been spending a lot of time in the Word, just looking for it, like saying, okay, Galatians 4, what does God say about business there? Well, asking that question, God will tell me, I'll kind of write something cool down or some businessy type thing. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. Sharing it with my friends. Hey, check this out. I was teaching some clients. Well, all of a sudden I've got like 20 pages of this stuff, like little diagrams and all this kind of stuff. And then I get this idea for this faith-driven leadership book. And now all of it. So that's the reason why I'm able to write it so fast, is because everything is already in my head. I've already done most of the scripture references from when I looked it up before. Now it's just a matter of pulling together some nice articles that validate the data or whatever.
So tell me we can pre-order it, right? Please.
Well, you can't yet. You will be able to by the end of the year.
What if we send them to your website and someone emails you and says, I want to be put on the list for when the book comes out?
Yes, you absolutely can email me. And from the website, it goes anytime you like type something in there, the contact log comes to me anyway. My executive assistant Anna and I both get it, but I always kind of just respond. I like my executive assistant to do project things that I don't feel like doing. So I actually manage more of the things that you would normally have an EA do, which is comical to me. We talked about being like reliable and punctual and all that. Most people have an EA for that. I have an EA because there's so many cool things that you can do with a computer that I don't know how to do, that my executive assistant, her name's Jessica, does. So she's amazing. But yeah, hit me up through the website. I'll make sure
Which
that you're
is
on the
okay.
list.
We have an audio only version too. So tell them, say what the
Oh,
website
good.
is.
I'm glad you reminded me. So yeah, it's jerryhowardinternational.com.
Okay.
jerryhowardinternational.com. That's the easiest way to reach me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. If you just message me on LinkedIn, that's cool. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. And then, of course, I post stuff on Facebook too, Twitter, Insta. I'm not that active on those, but Facebook and LinkedIn, very active. But if you want to reach me directly through the website, it's the easiest way. Let me know, because that book, I'm putting it in the publisher's hand in 2 weeks. Then we're going to start getting the graphics done, but it will be available for pre-order by the end of the year. I guarantee it.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. This project has got me on fire.
I can tell. I know it's got me on fire too. That's why I'm like, we have to pre-order this book. This is going to
literally, Laura, it covers everything we've talked about today. And
really?
Scripture, business, the leadership component, everything. It's all in there. It's probably why it's so fresh in my mind, because I've been writing on this stuff for a few weeks.
And you've got some great videos on YouTube as well.
Oh, thanks for saying that. Yeah. Some of those tools are the tools that we teach. I will give a shout out to Giant Worldwide, makes a lot of that content that I use. Okay. God get us a shout out too, of course, because a lot of it's scripture based as well. We just launched a community. If you go to my website, there'll be a prompt to join our online community, which is just jerryhowardinternational.com. It'll prompt you to join the community. It's free. I'm just about to put the first course in there. There's going to be free courses. Later on, there'll be some courses you can buy. But we're doing all these video stuff, and all of it has to do with faith, leadership, and business.
It's good too. It's well produced.
Oh, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I want a thing to be world class.
I can tell. That's awesome. That's great. We're running out of time though. I don't know how this just like blink of an eye. And I want to respect your time. So before we leave though, are there any final thoughts that you want to leave, or is there anything we didn't unpack that you were hoping we could get to?
I will leave some final thoughts, because a lot of people are probably wondering what I would always consider as the how-to, like, what's the next step? Okay, Jerry, great. The Bible makes me feel better, and all this stuff we've talked about today that you are. Well, I'm giving a talk later on in the year, actually early next year. So I'll give a plug for another organization that I'm speaking with. I'm their speakers bureau. C-Suite for Christ is huge, and like this, one of the speakers is Kevin Sorbo from God's Not Dead. We've got Tim Tebow. Riley Gaines just spoke.
Nice.
And so Jerry's going to be doing a breakout session when Kevin Sorbo is doing the keynote. That particular one's in January. Well, my talk for that is called Fitting into God's Armor. And the reason why this is so important is because Paul in Ephesians 6 talks about God's armor, and it gives a great explanation of how you put that armor on, what you do on a daily basis. But one of the things that God showed me in prayer was fitting into the armor. And what I was reminded of was the Marine Corps height and weight standards. Okay. So Jerry's always been like 20 pounds heavier than I look. And it's muscle. Like, I like to lift, that kind of thing. Nowadays, I certainly have 20, 30 pounds more than I should. But here's the point. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was always over the weight limit, but I had a first-class PFT, and my body fat percentage was always correct. But I used to complain about it. Why do I have to go tape out just because I weigh too much? And I was talking to my dad about this, and he was a Marine in the 70s. And he said, well, you got to understand, son, when you go to combat, you're not going to have protein drinks. You're not going to have a weight room. You're not going to have enough food. You're going to be stressed out. He said, it doesn't matter what you think you're going to do. You're going to lose weight, and you're probably going to lose about 20 pounds. He said, so the Marine Corps cannot allow you to get too heavy, because if you get too heavy, your gear is not going to fit, and you're going to be an ineffective warfighter. All right, so how does this translate in the spirit? Well, if we don't do our training every day, we are not going to be an effective warfighter. See, here's the thing. The fiery arrows of the enemy can be prevented from hitting you by using God's shield, the shield of faith, right? Well, what if you're walking away from the fire arrows of the enemy? Well, your shield's not in front of you, right? He's hitting you in the back. Well, if there's kinks in your armor because you've gotten too not spiritual, let's say it's like, imagine some armor that's too small for you, right? You're going to have like fat rolls sticking out or whatever. Your spirit looks the same way to the enemy. So he's looking for the kinks in the armor, and the kinks in the armor are the 5 gates, those 5 senses. So maybe the kink in your armor is pornography. Maybe the kink in your armor is eating too much, and now you're a burden to your family because you're unhealthy. Maybe the kink in your armor is spending money. Maybe the kink in your armor is working too much. Well, if you start your day in the word of the Lord, let him tell you, let's say Jesus is CEO, right? So let's make Jesus CEO. Well, now we got to check in every day and say, okay, what's the mission, vision, and values of Jesus? Well, the mission is go make disciples. The vision is everyone gets baptized in the Holy Spirit. And then if you don't know what God's value statements are, just look at his big 10. The 10 commandments are God's value statements. They perfectly extrapolate how to operate on a daily basis effectively without killing anybody, right? Well, so if we use that as our guideline, then we stay spiritually fit, and there's not going to be any kinks in our armor. And that's the key, is the kinks in your armor. And so you know that you need to spend time in prayer and in God's word every day to shore those kinks up, so that way the enemy's arrows can't. I mean, think about how many leaders are walking around with 10,000 arrows sticking out of their back, and they don't know why they feel so bad.
Yeah, that's
God's
so true.
word gets us ahead of that. And that's what I want people to do. Stay in God's word. Start with 15 minutes a day. Spend 5 minutes reading a devotional, 10 minutes writing about it. Just write with a pen, right? Because then you're going to activate the rest of your, kind of your brain in that regard. That's the first step. Next thing you know, you're going to be there for an hour, so you better carve out time. You're going to love it. Like Laura and I, you're going to get addicted to God's word and that spiritual food, and it's just going to nourish you, and you're going to just want to tell the world.
Yeah, that is probably the best analogy that I have heard to date about spiritual armor.
Praise God.
Yeah.
That is, and again, it came right out of Jerry's complaining to his dad 25 years ago.
It is so true, though. It's what I love about truth, is when you hear it, it resonates. It goes so much deeper than all the shallow words, that we hear every day with the distractions that we talked about. When we go deep and get to the heart of it, I get so excited about it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Laura, this has been an absolute joy coming out with you today. You are doing such an amazing job. And let me edify you real quick, because Defenders, that's the coolest name I've ever heard. I love it.
That's not me. That's Adam Lynch, the founder. Maybe we can get you and him on a show as well. I'm sure he would love to meet you. Oh, that would be a blessing to me for sure. But I'll tell you, the work that you're doing, I love how you expanded that. You're talking about defending is more than just, a firearms training. You're absolutely right, because we're in a spiritual battle, and that's the foundational thing that we got to defend. We got to defend the faith, defend the family, and then you can defend the business world or defend the country. You're going to be equipped for that. I think that's why we won World War II, is because we had faith as the foundation. Yep. I think we can get back to it. I think we can. I
agree. Yeah. I'll give you a quick one if you've got a couple minutes.
Sure. I've got all the time in the world. I just don't want to take too much of yours.
Oh, check this out. So I have a friend at church. Okay. So that 5 voices training that I was telling you about. All right. So he just got married. And if you're interested, go to my Facebook page. Jerry Howard, I just reposted it today, but it's me in their living room doing a corporate 5 voices training. Right. So here's how this manifested. A friend of mine from church was getting married. Now, he and his new wife have previous marriages, right, from before. I think their spouses died. I can't remember. But they have children. They have adult children. And so his name is Rob. Rob came to me, and he saw me do a talk like 2 years ago on this leadership stuff. And he said, "Hey, would you be able to do this for my family?" He's like, "We're getting married. I got 2 adult, like there's 8 kids or something, 8 or 7 or however many kids. There's a lot of kids involved. And they're all adults." And so he was like, "What if we could all come together under this 5 voices, under this leadership training?" I was a little worried because, they're all believers, which makes it easy because we can talk about Christ and the whole point. But I was like, okay, these are they're mostly in their 20s, maybe early 30s, right? So they're not going to be able to, maybe sit there in a living room and stay awake or whatever. I was so wrong about that, because they've been raised in the presence of the Lord. And Rob is a pastor. He's a different kind of pastor. They not only were they engaged, but they were laughing and joking and picking at each other in a nice way and having fun. They hardly looked at their cell phones. I mean, it was so, and here's why I bring it up. It was so inspirational, because these are the leaders of tomorrow. Yeah. And they're out there, and they're just waiting. And I think Gen Z particularly are just like, no way, we're not playing any nonsense. We're going to get the job done no matter what. And they're fired up and motivated. And that's who I was teaching. This is just the other night in a living room of all places.
That's so great to hear.
But here's what I tell people: be inspired, be motivated. Don't be depressed. Don't. You're going to have your moments like anybody else. But the next generation needs your inspiration. They need your motivation. They need your wisdom and your experience. So don't be afraid to raise up disciples, because they want it and they need it more than ever. People in America and in the workplace want deeper meaning to their work. So the opportunities are great.
Yep, the hunger is there, Jerry. The hunger is there for sure. Yeah, and just like in the Bible, it's not everybody's gonna understand it or hear it, and not the ears to hear and the eyes to see, and that's okay, right? We know that. Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh man, this has been a blast.
It has been a blast. It's been a lot of fun.